Greetings everyone, Darth Oblivious back with you for a third episode of Wretched Hive Recap. Yes indeed, Wretched Hive Recap. This week, what are we talking about? Well, just a few days ago, we had another BioWare live stream. This one about the story. So the second live stream this month, out of two planned per month. The first, of course, being some mechanics, technical background stuff, gameplay, that type of stuff. And the second one of the month being about the story of the game. So we'll review some of that. But first, let's take a look at some of the other things we are going to be talking about here. A couple of positive things, too, by the way. So first, we've got update on Nightmare loot changes. We've got SWTOR at its highest subscriber level in 3 years. Yes, quite positive there. We're going to be talking about the Eternal Championship, since that wasn't even mentioned on the live stream. And we will revisit this little post here by Where You Have It Right. Don't listen to the Raiders. And then, of course, like I said, we will be discussing the live stream. I originally was going to do the same thing as we did for our, was it our debut episode? I forget whether it was our debut episode or episode 2 already. It's the mind going. Yeah, it always goes first. Regardless, where I was just going to play through the live stream and comment on certain parts that struck a chord with me. However, this past live stream was of such to where it's really completely pointless to do that. But we'll get into that more. So I'll just be heading over to Dolphy's site, who had a recap of it, and we'll just be going through the points there via Dolphy. But anyway, let's begin here with this quick little ditty here. Update on the Nightmare loot changes. Now here we have, last week, Eric posted about some changes that are coming up, obviously, on the Nightmare loot drops. Now this has been a point of contention with raiders and that type of thing, to where the current best gear, which is rating 224, how its method of being acquired left a little bit something to be desired with the implementation of 4.0. Of course, just one of many things that were implemented without how do I want to say this, without, I guess, completely looking at the bigger picture, or without thinking of the implementation from start to finish, without great thought to it, sort of like the level sync implementation, which, surprisingly enough, we're not going to be talking about this episode, but I'm sure that will be up again. So originally, Nightmare loot, or this 224 loot, was guaranteed in operations that were part of the daily or weekly quest. So if by completing the daily or weekly quest, you sort of be guaranteed this 224 rating drop. However, in the Nightmare modes operations, which are the highest level difficulty operations in the game, I believe it would only drop, I think he even has it here, drop via the last boss, and it would only be a random chance for every other boss in the game. And so that sort of left a little much to be desired, to where if you're playing the hardest content in the game, you should be guaranteed to get the best loot, the highest rating armor, that kind of stuff throughout the game. Whereas this implementation only gave you a chance to get it. Again, excepting, I think, the last boss, which was guaranteed to drop it, but you're basically playing this whole operation to get one piece of loot at the end of the operation, whereas if you're playing the hard mode operations, you're guaranteed to get it more often than you were getting on Nightmare loot changes. So a little something to be left desired with that implementation. But here we have Eric letting us know that in a game updates 4.1 and 4.2, 4.1 coming up with the release of Chapter 10 in a couple of weeks here now, that they are making changes. And of course, yes, only the final boss in each night would have a 100% chance to drop the gear. So yes, it was only the final boss. I need new glasses too, I think. But anyway, of course, thanks to the feedback, they are now adjusting things. Okay, the final boss in each is guaranteed to drop 224. All other NIM bosses have a chance. In update 4.2, all bosses in NIM are guaranteed to drop 224. Oh, okay, this is for update 1. It only would have a 100% chance. So that doesn't change, except that doesn't change with 4.1. So the initial implementation, 4.1, only changes that the NIM bosses have a chance to drop 224, whereas before they did not. Update 4.0 changes that to where they will all guaranteed drop 224 armor. So the only reason we're not making changes for 4.1 is development time required to implement and test these changes, which is natural. Again, this harkens back to what we've discussed before. The key point here being testing these changes, development and testing. And again, as I've mentioned before in previous episodes, is that part of the biggest issue with the state of the game as it is right now is because of a lack of viable testing and vetting procedures. Now, if all this stuff was thrown up on the PTS and tested properly, vetted properly by the player base, we wouldn't even be having this discussion right now. This kind of update, while good, I'm glad they're changing it as it should be changed, but this kind of thing should never have made it to live. This is the kind of stuff that you have a PTS for, that you have testing for, that you have betas for. This type of thing right here. This 4.0 should have been what, or 4.2 should have been what 4.0 was in terms of this Nightmare loot and the 224 rating loot. And again, it's the lack of proper testing and vetting procedures is why this has been lingering now since October. These kind of issues, this kind of thing, and this is exactly why we have such a volatile and acerbic player base here on the forums, because of stuff exactly like this, because of a lack of proper testing and vetting of these implementations of these mechanics. It all goes to live, and then it just lingers and lingers until, of course, BioWare realizes the error of their ways, and then they go to attempt to change it. And of course, the changes, again, as Eric mentioned, need to be tested and vetted internally, which is fine. Something like that, that's fine. We don't need practically an open beta to fix this. The open beta should have been resolve the whole issue in and of itself. But again, beating the dead horse there. This is stuff I've been saying for the last couple of years now. Ever since the changes they've made after Rise of the Hutt Cartel, which had a proper testing and vetting, and Galactic Starfire, which both had proper testing and vetting procedures in place. Ever since somehow BioWare had a paradigm shift towards their thinking of how the PTS should run and operate and how they should test this content, that's where the real problems have begun, and it was immediately noticeable after they changed their testing procedures. The game pretty much went downhill from there in terms of playability and bug fixes, and that problem, just problems with the game, both minor and major, as has been discussed on the forums and we've mentioned in our previous 2 episodes. But at least it's being fixed, at least it's being changed, and it's definitely a change for the better. So something positive there. Now, of course, something else positive that we can talk about here is SWTOR at its highest subscriber level in 3 years. Now, just this past week, we had the fiscal report for the third quarter for EA, and Star Wars The Old Republic figured rather prominently in the report. So, thanks to Vedera here, who gives us a little bit of a recap on it. Here we go. Quote from the report: Star Wars fans are deeply engaged in our experiences on both mobile and PC as well. On mobile, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes quickly built a strong player base after it launched in November, reaching the top 5 most downloaded iOS games in more than 130 countries. So congrats to that. EA making Disney some bang for their $4 billion buck on the game. Of course, The Force Awakens pretty much did that on its own as well. On PC, Star Wars The Old Republic community has grown to the highest subscriber level in nearly 3 years, driven by the latest digital expansion, Knights of the Fallen Empire. More great content is on the way for players in each of these experiences, as well as new Star Wars titles from multiple platforms and development across the company. Subscriptions, advertising, and other digital revenue contributed $90 million, down 10% from last year, but that's quite all right. That's not Star Wars, that's EA overall, due to the natural decline in the recognition of Battlefield 4 premium revenue, etc., etc. However, EA Access is delivering strong, sustained growth, etc., etc. PC Origin Access, etc., etc. Our most recent update, Star Wars The Old Republic, has fueled subscriber growth with its rich content and deep storytelling. Well, now, of course, that's a debatable topic, but nevertheless, a much-needed expansion, as we have mentioned. Story has been the most neglected part of SWTOR outside of PvP. And so, of course, it was much needed. But again, very positive. But let's break it apart here. Let's go into the nitty-gritty. Now, is this surprising? No, it's not. This is basically the SOP for MMOs. For pretty much the last 10 years. You just look at WoW. WoW has their peaks and their valleys with their subscriber base. Why is that? Well, because every time they announce and prepare to release a new expansion, of course, everybody comes back to experience the new content. So the fact that SWTOR has its high subscriber levels in the last 3 years is no surprise, since this is probably the meatiest expansion, so to speak, since the game's launch, really. I mean, we've had several expansions. I mean, we've had Rise of the Hutt Cartel, we've had Strongholds, we've had Galactic Starfighter, and of course we've had Shadows of Revan. Now, of course, Galactic Strongholds and Galactic Starfighter are sort of mini expansions, more of DLC than anything else, with Rise of the Hutt Cartel and Shadows of Revan being a little bit more meatier. And I think all told, with what BioWare did with Knights of the Fallen Empire, this is probably the meatiest, the biggest expansion in terms of changes and content added to the game. So, no, this is hardly surprising at all that, everybody who's played the game, everybody who's been a fan, and of course, with the movie helping a little bit, everybody would be coming back with the announcement of Knights of the Fallen Empire. Now, we must remember here, this third quarter report basically encompasses up into the announcement of Knights of the Fallen Empire. So, the aftermath of the changes and the story and all that and everything that's happened basically since October, we'll have to wait for the next report, the fourth quarter report, to find out about that. So October, November, and December, we'll find out about in another couple of months, I believe. So we'll see how that goes. Or December, however the fiscal year, I forget how their fiscal year runs. This probably includes October, but I think November, December, January, something like that, comes later. But regardless, as I'm saying, it's positive increase. No surprise, however, it was much to be expected because the previous report, I think at one of the investor calls, also they stated that they had an increase based on the announcement of Knights of the Fallen Empire. So again, a little surprised. This is SOP, and it will be a little surprised to learn that subscriptions will be declining, falling off from whatever number it was at the time of this report. All that because people played through the content. There's nothing else for them to play through, so naturally they cancel their subscriptions. That's standard operating procedure. Now, of course, a lot more is to that based on a lot of the changes and the things going on with Knights of the Fallen Empire that we'll have to see how much of a decline and how radical a shift has affected the player base based on those changes and stuff that we've discussed and everything else. But also to go along with this, to pick this apart a bit, Star Wars The Old Republic grew to its highest level in nearly 3 years. So basically what they're saying is that we're basically back at the point where we were 3 years ago, which was shortly after the time, I believe, of going free-to-play. So the game launched December of 2011. It was free to play by November 2012. So, of course, during that whole transitional year, of course, free to play, we increased our player base to the maximum level it was. Even I believe, active player base, people engaged with the game, probably even more so than the original launch of the game had. So we had about 2 million people. We lost 3/4 of that over the course of the first year. Who bought the game, not necessarily continued subscribing past the initial 30-day free period. But so we grew to our highest subscriber level in nearly 3 years. So after free to play, we had the good year, and then again, naturally, the decline as we saw very little content coming back into the game during that period. So really, 2013 and 2014, aside from the mini expansions, were really lean years for Star Wars, The Old Republic. And even, 2015 got a little bit better, but there are a lot of issues coming along with Shadows of Revan this past year. So, if you look at that, highest subscriber level in 3 years, well, considering the last 3 years have probably seen the lowest amount of subscriber numbers in the history of the game, since it's basically first year and it's moved to free to play in 2012. Well, yeah, highest subscriber level in 3 years, but does that necessarily mean what we think it means? As you see, and we'll go back to the previous announcement where there was a 30% increase in subscriber numbers. Well, there's a big difference between a 30% increase of, say, 100 and a 30% increase of, say, 100,000. That's a big difference in numbers there. So, 30% increase in and of itself, hey, that sounds good. But if you're only increasing 30% of 100, yeah, that's not really as good as 30% of 100,000. Now, of course, I'm not saying that the game only had 100 subscribers. These are just numbers for comparison's sake. So, the fact that we've had a 30% increase in subscriber numbers and the highest subscriber level in 3 years, really, it's a positive. Again, I'm glad to see that. That means, at least people have come back to try to experience the game and the new storyline and the new expansion, which is a good thing. But in terms of raw numbers, does it really mean a lot? No, it does not. Because obviously we don't have the exact numbers, or at least the exact numbers aren't public knowledge. You can find them out if you know the right people. So having a 30% increase of whatever those publicly unknown numbers are, yeah. I mean, ultimately, is SWTOR at the level where it was at launch and where it was during the initial free-to-play transition? No, it's not. Is it better off than any other period in the game? Yes, it is. So it is a positive, but it's still in the grand scheme of things, a positive, but it doesn't really mean all that much because ultimately, what will be the telling factor and what will be important to the game is the retention level, is the longevity of the game, and this is something we've mentioned before as well. It's not necessarily these spurts of positivity, but can we maintain that? Can we sustain that? Can we keep these people playing? That's the key. And again, as we have discussed, right now, it's iffy whether that's going to happen or not. So we'll have to see. We'll have to keep a close ear and eye out for this information. So good positive things happening in SWTOR, and we can only keep our fingers crossed that it continues that positive trend. Again, Bioware needs to make some core changes in order, I think, for that to happen, for that positivity to continue to thrive and grow over the next year or two. So we'll see how that gets along. So, next up, let's talk about the Eternal Championship. So, apparently this, if I recall correctly, I believe Eric Musco mentioned something about this, and it was supposed to be talked about in the story live stream, but nothing was mentioned of it. But here it is, the Eternal Championships, new content that's coming out soon. So, Stephen Chu here, and this is the this is actually the thread asking us about gear rewards and that kind of stuff for the Eternal Championship, what we thought. So, again, good feedback, good dialogue between players and the developers in developing this content, something that's very necessary, very needed for the game. And this is rather a long post detailing what the Eternal Championship is going to be about. Now, for the TLDR, if anyone's ever played the original the original Guild Wars game, and in more specifically the Eye of the North expansion, you'll be familiar with something called the I forget what it's called now. But anyway, in the Eye of the North, in Gunner's Hold, there is something where you basically, it's a solo mission, it's a solo content to where you basically take on various champions in a round. And you're basically using your skills as a player with a character you're playing to defeat these various opponents. And eventually you get to play against the main guy, the guy who actually offers you this this opportunity to compete in the championship, and defeating him gives you prizes and glory and stuff like that. So that's essentially what this Eternal Championship is. It's basically the same thing. It's you and your companion going into this arena and fighting various foes, and as you go along, there's various bosses you can defeat, and of course you will be rewarded as such. So if you played the original Guild Wars, this Eternal Championship will be very familiar to you, because it's basically, I would almost say, just based on some of the descriptions and stuff, almost a copy and paste of how the Guild Wars arena, championship arena, is set up. So again, some of the gear we have here is a chance to drop a new mini pad, boss 10, drop a new mount, new achievements and titles, yada yada. All the glitz and glory to get people replaying this stuff. So essentially here it is. If you want more details about it, there you go. Go ahead over and read that post. But essentially, again, something else positive coming out of the forums. Again, the dialogue between players, and you can see it's making a difference in developing. It's affecting how this Eternal Championship is developed. Of course, the positive that we've got some new content, and new content that will offer at least some level of difficulty as well to the game. So, as a matter of fact, on that note, right here is what Stephen is talking about. The Eternal Championship is the latest trend in entertainment among the yada yada. Will be revealed. Yeah, in fact, here it is regarding the backstory. Will be revealed next week in the developer live stream with Charles Boyd, which it was never mentioned, so we never got any backstory on this Eternal Championship. and we are still awaiting a blog post, but that will be coming with 4.2, which I believe is when it launches. So you access to a mission similar to Flashpoint. So, i.e., you go find an NPC, or you go to the the mission terminal to pick up the mission, which will give you access to the Eternal Championship. You compete in many rounds as you can, and you get data crystals, etc., etc. And you decide whether you want to keep competing or cash out at that time, so you can repeat as many times as you wish, etc., etc. 3 weekly missions to defeat the bosses. Evolve ads, etc. So just basically giving you the mechanics. Somewhere in here, I thought he mentioned sort of the reasoning behind it, but that might have been a previous post. Anyway, part of this is, so what they're deigning to do with this Eternal Championship, again, is to offer a bit more challenge, a repeatable challenge to the game. But basically, the way it's going to work is that the first 5 levels should be readily accomplished by anyone playing the game, regardless of your skill level. After round 5, after you defeat the fifth boss, then the difficulty ramps up a bit, and you actually need to use some skill in order to complete it and reach round 10 and the final boss. So at least that's something to address some of the difficulty concerns. But again, overall, this is one small piece of content in an overall larger game that has been, detrimentally affected by some of these changes in 4.0. And again, the meat and bones of the game itself, the 1 to 50 level in content, the 8 individual class story missions, the bread and butter of the game itself has been negatively affected by these changes. So adding a little bit of challenge back into here is good, but still does not address the overall difficulty and concern with challenge with the game. Again, having a certain level of challenge, having a certain feeling a certain level of accomplishment while playing a game helps the longevity of the game, which, as we've mentioned, that's been taken away a bit. So, along a little bit of the terms with that, let's get back to listening to our orator friends. So again, some of these here, there are a couple of posts here I wanted to point out that actually brought me to this, which I think is down here. Again, Gisolo and Galactic Hegger weighing in with some very good ideas and thoughts about the whole thing. Basically talking about some of the things that was said previously about the game and the fourth story and that kind of, or the fourth pillar and story and all that. Basically what they're saying is like, well, is SWTOR really unique in having a fourth pillar story? No, it's not really unique. I mean, the depth to which they went to enhance the fourth pillar, I think, is rather unique among games. But the fact that, Star Wars The Old Republic has story, well, that's every MMO has story. I mean, every MMO has a story that you play through, so that's neither here nor there with that. BioWare just dressed it up and fancied it up a lot more than many other MMOs do. And so, of course, we know story. Ultimately, story cannot maintain the longevity of the game, even episodic story, as they are doing here, because, again, as I mentioned before, there are a myriad of reasons why this game failed in its first year as a subscription-based game, or at least the subscription model failed, I should say. And part of it was the heavy reliance on story and not having enough repeatable end game content for which players to play through, i.e. raids and that kind of stuff. So, but that's only part of it, so we'll see how long this story can buck that trend. But anyway, Lord Artemis, the main driving force for continued subscription and a reduced churn is storyline. That much is obvious across the entire life of this title. Both PvP and raiding have done little, in my opinion, to help this title solvent. This is a storyline that casuals have kept the lights on. Generally speaking, of course, I would agree with that, up to the point evidence presented to contradict this obvious truth, in my opinion, is speculative at best, as is, of course, that comment, because there is a little bit more. There have been raiders and PvPers, in this game maintaining the game, and of course they are the subscribers of the game. They have to be in order to partake of that in any good thing. And of course, as BioWare has said, subscribers are the biggest purchasers in the cartel market. So, say that it is strictly the casuals and storyline players, a bit disingenuous. PvPers and raiders have actually helped this game along, in addition to the people who basically have been the ultaholics. I mean, when you get right down to it, it's not strictly the storyline players, but it's the ultaholics that have actually maintained this game through lack of story, lack of PvP, and raid updates. Yes, people spoke with their wallets in the first year. The game has actually been increasing and been maintaining steady profit ever since then, during those 2 years when raids have been present. Mr. JMCA. And of course, there's no numbers, but is more, no more basic than others. This is not a raiding or PvP game. That I do agree with. Again, the main selling point of the game was BioWare was these 8 individual class stories. Now, again, that's the main selling point of the game, the 8 individual class stories. That's the bread and butter of the game. As I mentioned, that still has been the most neglected part of the game, because we still only have those 8 individual class stories, with, I think, a minor exception in Shadow of Revan, where you get, I think, 1 bit of dialogue for each of the classes that differ. We're basically down to 1 singular storyline. So, story is still being hurt. On the actual state of things, everything else presented has more to do with raiders PvP are trying to overstate their importance in this current market than anything else. And that I definitely agree with, and that is supported by actual facts, which it is, studies, public statements from the current market that have been posted this way too many times, etc., etc. Yes, indeed. Again, as we mentioned, PvPing, raiders, hardcore players are a minority in any rating, in any game's community, unless that game specifically is designed and targets for them, i.e. being a niche game. But yeah, really, I love how all this stuff puts people into neat little packages. Now, we mentioned this last episode. There are to lump everybody into casual or hardcore is a bit disingenuous and doesn't help the debate any, because you have people who are hardcore who are just into story. They don't raid in PvP, but you can consider them hardcore players. There are casuals that raid in PvP on a regular basis, but they are still casual players. Myself, was one of them. In every MMO I play, I partake in endgame content and PvP. Is it my favorite content? No, but it's content that I enjoy playing on a regular basis, and I, at this point, am a casual player. Well, I understand that. I feel the same way. I do not want to counter every claim made, as folks have a right to their own opinion. I only put a snippet of the say Final Fantasy, likely from Oblivion. This game's business choice A, likely to know. I make here his words. So, basically, FFXIV. MMO genre has become more geared towards hardcore players. I don't necessarily agree with that. In order to attract experienced MMO players, games tend to be more action-oriented or visually flashy. Yes, obviously. So I feel that casual games find it difficult to continue playing MMO games. I don't think being action-oriented or visually flashy has any bearing on casual players being able to find MMO games accessible. So I think that's a little bit of a misstatement there. Even though I agree in general on that principle. Having said this, from a business standpoint, it is more effective to cater to core MMO gamers whose titles are faced with very difficult decisions. Of course, if you cater to the core MMO player, that's your longevity right there. The core MMO player is the one who's going to stick with your game the longest and be spending that money. So in FFXIV, we deliberately targeted those who have yet to play an MMORPG and made certain that the first part of the game wouldn't require players to recruit a party of other players. Now again, this is typical of the trend of MMOs, having that solo experience, having that option to be able to play the game as a single player game, so to speak. Also, the speed at which players need to react is intentionally slower at the start of the game. For hardcore MMO players, this may seem boring, and admittedly, it's a piece of feedback received, so boring and easy leveling game. So that's a little surprise. But if we don't attract new MMO players, we can't expect this genre to expand. A very true statement there. Based on this concept, we took a story-driven approach where the battle content becomes progressively harder. Here's the key here. Where the battle content becomes progressively harder while the story motivates the player to continue. At the same time, we introduce non-combat focused elements such as player housing, the gold saucer and its attractions, a AAA triad minigame, etc., etc. So all this side game that will keep players engaged. We also added other content that mitigates the more casual fear of not being able to catch up to higher level players, such as easing the difficulty of obtaining gear over time. Also a good thing. For high-end content, the stages are very difficult at first, but through subsequent updates, their difficulty was toned down so casual players will be able to clear the older content. Again, that makes perfect sense since that older content is no longer relevant, so to speak. We want the new players to be able to go in there and access it more readily, and etc., etc., etc. So basically what he's saying is that they made the early part of the game accessible and easy for the casual players, but there is still difficult content. Right here, it becomes progressively harder. So there is still endgame content there. Who otherwise stereotypic is for the reason Yoshida meant being, but he misses the point entirely. But there is somebody up here. And I had this. I wonder if these posts were deleted. Yeah, of course, him, JMCA saying that leftover Rise of the Cartel. Sorry, we went about the top reason. Now, yeah, that would be patently incorrect. Training PvP, folks put the game on budget, so where are your facts? No, actually, it was the story who put the game on life support budget-wise because there was no rating in PvP, and that only came afterwards as the game went free to play and the game's health began to stabilize and increase. Rating PvP helped along with that. It's an interesting read, but here we go. I think you're making the common error to imply people that enjoy and do not wish to see the band of true group are asking for exclusion of all other content. Hardcore generally is towards the end of someone that doesn't get it. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Hardcore players still have a place in MMA, so we do not have the same dominance that they once had. Absolutely agreed. You see, I contend that the very definition of MMO has changed. It is no longer about repeatable progression content at endgame as the driving force. Well, naturally, because the driving business model of MMOs has changed. Before, back in the quote-unquote good old days of MMOs, when everybody was charging $15 a month to play the game, or paying $15 a month to play the game, ensuring that these people would play month to month was the key. So hence you had the grind, the gear grind, the raids, the end game content. So naturally, with a paradigm shift in the desire of the gaming community to not have to pay a monthly fee to play a game that they initially bought, there's been a paradigm shift in how these games need to be designed. So it's no longer a focus on keeping people playing, but keeping people engaged enough to be interested in purchasing fluff content from a cash shop. So, of course, raiding does not have the dominance that it once held when this genre was new, young, and something interesting, something different than your single player experience. So yeah, that's a little surprised, but ultimately it's still, if you're going to have a business model that takes in part, to some extent, a monthly fee. If you're one of these hybrid games that has free to play at its core, but still maintains a monthly premium option, so to speak, then you're going to need to make sure that monthly premium option appeals to the players to begin with, and that you have the content that is worth that monthly optional fee as well. And if players find that they don't have anything to keep them engaged, that they don't have anything to play on a regular basis in your game content to experience, then they're not going to pay that fee. So ultimately, while raiding and PvP and things like that don't have that dominance in the market that it once had, they are still ultimately integral parts of the MMO genre. If you are going to charge a subscription service for your game in one manner or another, if you want people to pay that subscription service, you have to have some kind of end game content that will keep the people engaged. Story alone is not going to do it. Now, as I've said, there are many reasons why SWTOR failed in the first year as a subscription-based game, but story only being one of those reasons. But ultimately, story and the lack of end game is a big part of that reason why it failed. So the devs and the community really needs to look at this logically and realize that story is not going to carry this game, especially story as it is presented here in Knights of the Fallen Empire, where you only get a couple hours of new content a month, and that's it. That's not going to maintain the game. And no matter how many fluff rewards you throw at the player base, you're eventually not going to be able to maintain a set number of subscriptions based on that alone. You're going to have a healthy, thriving end game community, and that includes in a big way, not to all the exclusion of all else, but still in a big way, PvP and raiding content. Now, there's a lot of other things that can be considered end-game content that can keep people engaged, such as crafting and player housing, but the meat and bones of what you have to have in your end game is a healthy PvP and raiding community. That's ultimately what's going to be able to sustain a subscriber base over and beyond the limited amount of story content that you can produce on a regular basis, which we'll actually be getting into as we now review here the live stream notes. So basically, if you missed the live stream, you really didn't miss much. Now, this live stream included Charles Boyd Charles Boyd, who is the lead designer story-wise on the game, and Alexander Freed, who you may know as the writer of the Agent storyline, the original Agent class storyline, as well as doing some other Star Wars-y things outside of the game, such as I believe he's the one who created, and they talk about this in the live stream. Theron Shan for the comic series, etc., etc. So give this backstory on Theron Shan, that kind of stuff. But otherwise, if you missed this live stream, you basically didn't miss much because, again, there was no information on the Eternal Championship whatsoever, even though Steven's post said there would be. And basically, 95% of what they talked about story-wise is everything we already know. It basically recapped the Kotfi storyline up to this point. And gave a little background about writing some of the characters and some of the thought processes, I guess, behind what these villains are. But again, nothing that you really needed a live stream to tell us. This is something that could be thrown into a database or a blog or a wiki article or something like that. I mean, it was basically a complete waste of a live stream. For the most part, go over this information. And again, even the Chapter 10 stuff that they talked about is stuff we can already infer or we already know outright. Kaleo's coming back, this and that. So basically, completely useless information. And then we get into the Q&A. Now, obviously, this Q&A was predetermined because they did not take any questions from the live stream, even though Hyperspace Beacon, aka Larry Everett, who you may know from originally Massively Online, and then now I think it's called Massively OP, basically writes the Star Wars The Old Republic weekly articles. He popped in there and asked a very good question as it relates to role players. And he basically wanted to see what sort of the background information is on the other factions, like the Hutt Cartel and this kind of stuff. It's like, how did this Zakul invasion of our known galaxy affect sort of these ancillary factions and the galaxy at large, you might say. And of course, that was completely ignored and lost in favor of a predetermined Q&A. Again, most of the stuff we can already infer or already knew outright. Will we see more Empire Republic in the current state as chapters are released? Of course we will. Storyline go through, basically nothing really of note. Mandalorians is like a completely fluffball question. Who really cares? Yeah, Mandalorians are great or cool. Yeah, why wouldn't we see them? It's a question that need not be asked or answered. Theron Shan, again, a question that need not be asked or answered. Of course, Theron Shan would make a comeback. It would only be logical to assume he would. Conflict with previous romance, love a new one. Well, what the heck do you think? Whoever asked this question is a complete and utter drooling moron. Of course there would be a conflict. Why wouldn't there be a conflict? Again, another question that would not need to be asked or answered. I mean, the answer to that thought would be rather obvious. Of course there would be. Will other characters know that I am resuming a relationship if I am to do so with Cleo? Again, same thing with the previous question. Yeah. Well, Chapter 10, you use the classic cut. Now, here's an interesting and good information here, actually. One of the few pieces of good information that came out of this live stream. Will they use this asinine classic cutscene style listing with the aligned specialist? No, the chapters. So here we have confirmation. The chapters will always use the cinematic way of telling the story. It's just that as you interact with your companions, your alliance members, it's going to use the budget saving classic cut style scene. No matter how they spin that, it's an asinine method when compared to everything else in the game and your previous interactions with your companions. It's strictly done to save money on the budget. Again, one of those poor implementations that, hey, may have looked good on paper but really doesn't work within the game. You should just stick with what works and what everybody enjoys, which is the cinematic storytelling. Again, probably have to do this because of budget constraints. How long is it going to take you to get our original companions back? Of course, it's tough to say. Well, that answers it all. There's no way we were going to get an answer to this question. Scorpio romance, again. Why? Why does this even need to be asked? There are far more important questions to be asking and answering than an asinine question like a romance with a robot, for God's sakes. I mean, seriously. But there was one tidbit that was brought up in the live stream that caught my ear. And it was when Charles was talking about playing through some of the Chapter 10 information, or Chapter 10 story. You know, right now it's in internal testing, stuff like that. And he made a comment about something about when it's finished this and that. So, basically what the comment said was that this chapter is not even finished, and here it is. We're only a couple weeks away from it being launched. Actually, we're a week and a half away from it going live. And at the time of this live stream, it wasn't even complete. So here we have the situation. Now, at initial outset, we got our 9 complete and full chapters in October, and we were told that the storyline would pick up again in January with Chapter 10. So by the time Kotfi launched, these 9 chapters were already complete and ready to go in October. So by that time, Chapter 10 should have already have been in production. Heck, Chapter 11 should have already been in production. I mean, in October, Chapter 10 really should be in the final stages of development. And Chapter 11 should be in the process of beginning to be developed if it's going to be released in March. But regardless, we were told that Chapter 10 would come in January. They got pushed back a month. Why? Got pushed back. Well, obviously the reason is why is because it wasn't ready. But here we are, at the time this being recorded and uploaded to YouTube, February 1st, 2016. We are as I said, a week and a half away from the official launch of Chapter 10, and it's not ready yet? That's a bit puzzling for content that should have been ready in January, a month ago. So that's very telling. And I wonder if this delay has anything to do with the feedback of the player base once people realize that the key component, that the key catchphrase of Knights of the Fallen Empire was that choices matter, and we found out that choices really don't matter. Another one of those implementations and things that somehow Bioware's PR department shut their mouths off about without really thinking of the ramifications of such. No, choices up to this point do not matter. That's what we were sold on with this expansion, that your choices throughout the gameplay of these 9 chapters would make a difference in what you experience as a player with your character, and we found out it does not. Hence, the replayability of these chapters is null and void. So, could that possibly be part of the reason why this chapter was delayed in the way it is, and the fact that it is still not complete and ready to go live less than 2 weeks before its launch date? Did they have to go back and change some stuff around to actually show, keep good on that promise of, yes, your choices do matter in this new storyline? Well, truth be told, I hope that's the reason. I really do hope that's the reason, that they went back and had to redo some things in Chapter 10 in order to show that, yes, your choices really do matter. Because if you think of the other alternative on why this is delayed and it's not ready yet, that is very troubling indeed, because the only other reason for that is that Bioware cannot develop this stuff in a timely manner. They cannot put out 1 chapter a month simply due to resources and stuff like that. And that's troubling indeed, because right now we are expecting 1 chapter a month until Chapter 16. So basically, for the next 7 months, we're expecting new storyline content every month. And if they're incapable of providing that in a relatively playable and bug-free manner, there's going to be hell to pay. Let's not make any bones about that. There's going to be hell to pay, and it's going to hurt the player base, the player base numbers, the subscriber numbers, even more so than some of the decisions we've seen with 4.0 up to this point in time. So I generally hope that Chapter 10 was delayed because of this issue of our choices not really mattering, and BioWare will take to heart that, you say something, you better make good on that statement. So I hope this is a sign of them making good, at least on that statement, of showing how your choices will matter in these upcoming next couple of chapters, because it better happen soon. And if that's not the reason, then we're in big trouble. This game is in big trouble if they cannot put out this content once a month and have it playable and bug-free and have it engaging. But we'll see how that goes. Otherwise, that pretty much wraps it up for that for this episode. Pretty much hit all the key points. So join us next time on Wretched Hive Recap. Perhaps next Monday? Perhaps in a couple of weeks after the 1st of February State of the Galaxy, the live stream, which we will most definitely view. Anyway, this is Darth Oblivious saying thanks for tuning in this time around. I hope some of the topics we discussed and some of the comments and thoughts I have put out there keep people thinking and engaged about how to improve this game. And let's keep talking about it on the forums and elsewhere. In the meantime, Darth Oblivious saying thanks for watching, and until next time, I will see you in game. And enjoy your mayhem.